Hi, welcome to another episode of the English Talk community. I'm Sarah, and I'm so happy you're here with me today. This is the right and safest place for you to practice your English fluency, without fear and without judgment. Here, you'll learn to speak English more naturally, with confidence, and without overthinking every word or sentence. Maybe you've been studying for years, maybe you understand everything people say, but when it's time to speak, you freeze, you hesitate, or your mind goes blank. And maybe you ask yourself, why does it still feel so hard to speak like a native speaker? Let me tell you something important right from the start. Fluency isn't about speaking fast. It's not about having a perfect accent. It's not even about using difficult words or complicated grammar. Fluency is about connection. It's about expressing your thoughts in real time, with clarity and confidence. It's about speaking in a way that feels natural, not perfect, but real. So today, we're going to explore how to make your spoken English sound more like a native speaker's, not by memorizing difficult expressions or studying grammar rules, but by learning to simplify, to connect, and to speak from a place of comfort. I'm not here to give you a list of things to memorize. I'm here to help you think differently about how you speak. And by the end of this episode, I want you to feel more relaxed, more empowered, and more inspired to speak English your own way. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stayed quiet in a conversation because you were afraid of making a mistake? Have you ever said nothing at all because you were trying to find the perfect sentence? Maybe you felt that what you wanted to say was too simple, not advanced enough. Or maybe your voice sounded flat and you weren't sure how to make it more expressive. If any of this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. I've worked with so many learners from around the world who feel the same way. That's why in today's episode, we'll dive into small but powerful shifts that can make a big difference in how you sound and feel when speaking. I'll share real stories from people who faced the same struggles and found ways to move past them. We'll talk about what native speakers really do in everyday conversations, and how you can borrow their habits to sound more natural without feeling fake. You'll also hear examples of how using shorter, simpler sentences can actually make you a more effective communicator. And here's the thing I want you to remember. You don't need to speak like someone else. You don't need to copy anyone's voice or personality. Speaking like a native doesn't mean losing your identity. It means expressing yourself in English with ease, rhythm, and confidence. It means speaking without fear. It means trusting your voice. I want to keep this episode light and honest. So let's drop the pressure for a moment. You're not here to be tested. You're here to grow. I want this podcast to feel like a friendly conversation. Like you're sitting with me, just listening and learning at your own pace. You can pause, rewind, take notes, or just relax, and let the words flow into your ears. However you learn best, this is your space. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. If this podcast has helped you, if you've learned something new, or felt motivated after listening, I'd love for you to hit the like button, follow the podcast, or subscribe to our channel depending on where you're listening from. When you do that, it helps this message reach more learners like you around the world. And it tells me you're enjoying this journey. So thank you for supporting this community, means a lot to me. Now, back to you. Think for a moment. What does speaking like a native mean to you? Is it about sounding American or British? Is it about using slang or idioms? Or is it something deeper like feeling comfortable in your own skin while speaking English? Whatever it means to you, I want you to know that it's possible to get closer to that goal by changing the way you approach your speaking practice. And it starts today. In this episode, I'll guide you through practical ways to make your speech more natural step by step. You'll see how speaking clearly is more important than speaking perfectly. You'll hear stories from learners in cities like Paris, Lisbon, and Milan, people just like you, who discovered how to bring more ease into their English through small, simple changes. And as always, we'll focus on what really matters, feeling free to express yourself. So wherever you are right now, maybe you're walking to work, sitting at your desk, cooking dinner, or riding the train, I invite you to take a breath and just be here. Let this be your moment to grow, to feel supported, and to remember that speaking English is not about impressing anyone. It's about connecting. It's about being understood. It's about being heard. And here's a little reminder for you already have everything you need to become a great speaker. You don't need to wait until your English is perfect. You just need to keep showing up, one conversation at a time, one sentence at a time, one new habit at a time. And that's exactly what we'll explore together in today's episode. Let's begin. Let's talk about something that so many English learners struggle with: this constant pressure to speak perfectly. Maybe you've felt it too. The feeling that if your grammar isn't perfect, if you pause too long, or if you don't know a fancy word, people will think you're not fluent. I've met learners who are so afraid of making mistakes that they end up speaking less, or not speaking at all, and I understand why. For many of us, language learning starts in a classroom, where we're graded, corrected, and compared. So we grow up thinking that speaking perfectly is the goal. But when it comes to real communication, the truth is different. Fluency is not about perfection. It's not about speaking fast, using rare words, or sounding like a dictionary. It's about being natural. It's about saying what you mean in a way that feels clear, relaxed, and confident. People don't connect with your grammar. They connect with your energy, your tone, your message. So the idea that you have to be perfect to be fluent, that idea holds you back more than anything else. Think about the way native speakers talk in everyday situations. They don't use long academic words in casual conversations. They don't always speak in full sentences. Sometimes they repeat words, or pause, or even make grammar mistakes. But they keep the conversation going. Why? Because their goal is communication, not perfection. When you realize that, it changes the way you see fluency. I once spoke with a learner who had been studying English for over 10 years. His vocabulary was strong, and his writing was excellent, but when we had a conversation, he hesitated a lot. He was trying so hard to choose impressive words, to build complex sentences, that the natural rhythm of speech was completely lost. He sounded more like a textbook than a person. And I asked him, what if you just said the first thing that comes to your mind? What if you focused on being clear, instead of sounding smart? We tried it. He simplified his sentence from it: would be highly appreciated if you could provide me with assistance, to can you help me with this? And it worked. It felt human. It felt real. That's when I saw the shift. He started letting go of the need to impress, and started focusing on being understood. So many learners think that big words equal better English. But I want to tell you something that might surprise you. Native speakers often prefer short, direct sentences. We say things like, "I'm not sure," "that makes sense," or "let's do it this way." These are not advanced expressions. They're simple, natural, and powerful. They show confidence without trying too hard. And they create a more relaxed atmosphere in conversation. When you try to sound perfect all the time, it adds pressure to your brain. You spend energy searching for the right word, instead of staying present in the moment. That pressure builds anxiety, and anxiety blocks fluency. But when you speak naturally, using words you're comfortable with, you create space in your mind. You allow your ideas to flow. And that's when your real voice starts to come out. I want to encourage you to embrace the idea of natural speech. This means speaking in a way that feels right to you, using expressions you've heard many times before, and trusting that simple is enough. It also means using your voice with rhythm, tone, and emotion, not just words. Even a short sentence, like "I'm happy to help," can sound warm and real when you say it with the right tone. Let me give you a simple exercise. The next time you want to say something in English, pause and ask yourself, how would a native speaker say this in a casual way? Not in a business email. Not in a formal speech. Just in a conversation. And then, choose the simplest way you can say it. Try replacing longer phrases with shorter ones. Instead of saying "I was wondering if perhaps you could explain this to me," say "Can you explain this?" You'll notice how much easier and smoother it becomes. You might also want to listen more carefully to how people speak in real conversations. Watch short videos, podcasts, or scenes from shows where people talk naturally. Focus on their sentence structure, the pauses, the way they emphasize certain words. You'll notice a pattern. They keep it short, they keep it clear, and they keep it moving. They don't stop to find perfect grammar. They focus on the message. Another shift that helps is thinking about what you want the listener to feel. Do you want to sound friendly? Curious.com. This helps you use tone and natural expressions to create the feeling behind your words. Speaking naturally is not just about saying words correctly. It's about how your words make someone feel. If you're constantly chasing perfect English, you'll miss the opportunity to connect in real conversations. That's why I always remind learners to go for connection over correction. That one idea can change your entire experience with English. You don't have to correct every mistake. You don't have to use every word perfectly. You just have to keep speaking. And the more you practice speaking in a relaxed and natural way, the faster you'll build fluency. Why? Because you'll stop freezing. You'll stop editing yourself in real time. You'll build automaticity, the ability to speak without overthinking, and that's one of the keys to sounding more like a native. So I encourage you to notice your habits. Are you using long, formal phrases because you think they sound smarter? Are you afraid to say something simple because it feels too basic? Start questioning those patterns. And slowly, replace them with new ones. Choose ease over pressure. Choose clarity over complexity. And most of all, choose your own voice over trying to sound like someone else. That's where fluency begins. Not with perfection, but with practice, presence, and the courage to speak like yourself. Let me tell you about someone I had the chance to work with not too long ago. Her name is Laura, and she's an engineer from Madrid. When I first met Laura, I could tell right away that she had a solid understanding of English. She could read reports, write professional emails, and follow technical presentations without a problem. Her vocabulary was strong. Her grammar was accurate. But when it came to speaking in meetings, especially international ones, something changed. Laura would freeze. Not just pause or hesitate, she would completely shut down when the spotlight was on her. I remember her telling me about a meeting she had with colleagues from Germany and the UK. She had ideas she wanted to share. She had done all the preparation, and she even practiced some of her sentences in advance. But when the moment came to speak, her mind went blank. She felt her hands shaking. She smiled politely, nodded, and said nothing. She felt invisible. And after that meeting, she told herself something that many learners tell themselves too often. Maybe I'm just not fluent enough. But the truth is, Laura was fluent. She just didn't believe it yet. Her English wasn't the problem, her mindset was. We started working together in short coaching sessions, and one of the first things I asked her was, "What do you usually try to say in those meetings?" She opened up her notebook and read me some of the phrases she had prepared. They were long, complex sentences, things like, "In light of the recent data, I believe a reevaluation of the proposed system architecture may be necessary to ensure optimal functionality." And I said, "Laura, would you say this to a colleague in Spanish?" She laughed and said, "No, of course not. I'd say something like, I think we should look at the system again." And that was our first breakthrough. Laura was trying so hard to sound professional that she ended up sounding unnatural, and that pressure made her freeze. So we went back to basics. We took her ideas and broke them down into short, simple sentences. Instead of trying to speak like a formal document, she started practicing how to speak like herself. We worked on phrases like, "I think we need to check this again. We could try a different approach. I'm not sure this will work for the new system." These were real, clear, direct, and most importantly, they were easy for her to say. But we didn't stop there. One of the key parts of Laura's progress came from something that might sound small, but made a huge difference: mirror practice. I asked her to spend just 5 minutes a day speaking to herself in the mirror. She chose 1 or 2 sentences she might say in a meeting, and repeated them slowly, looking at her own face. She focused on clarity and intonation, not speed or complexity. At first, she felt awkward. She told me it felt strange, almost silly. But after a week, something changed. She started recognizing how her voice sounded when she was relaxed. She became more aware of her body language. She practiced pausing, using her hands, and speaking with intention. She even started smiling more when she practiced. That confidence, that ease, started to grow inside her. Little by little, Laura stopped writing long scripts before her meetings. Instead, she prepared key points, simple sentences that she could say naturally. She practiced them aloud in the mirror the night before, and when the meetings came, she didn't freeze anymore. She spoke slowly, clearly, and with presence. I remember the day she messaged me after a big team presentation. She said, "I spoke twice in the meeting. It was short, but people listened. And they even asked me to explain my point again. They treated me like an expert. For the first time, I didn't feel less fluent. I felt like a part of the team." That's what this is all about. Not sounding perfect, Not copying someone else's voice, but owning your words, your voice, your place in the conversation. Laura's story is a reminder that fluency doesn't live in long, complicated phrases. It lives in clarity. It lives in simple, strong sentences that come from you, not from a textbook. It lives in the confidence to say, "This is what I think," even if your voice shakes a little the first time. If you've ever felt like Laura, if you've ever frozen in a meeting, or stayed quiet in a group conversation because you weren't sure how to say something perfectly, I want you to remember this. It's not about perfection. It's about participation. Speak simply, speak clearly, speak often, and trust that the more you practice, the more natural it will feel. Even just 5 minutes a day in front of a mirror can create real change. Practice those key sentences. Say them slowly. Focus on how your voice sounds. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be yours. When you speak English, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to sound impressive, intelligent, advanced, or are you trying to be understood? This might sound like a simple question, but the answer can completely change the way you speak. Many learners, especially those who study English for professional or academic reasons, feel pressure to speak in a way that sounds impressive. They want to use advanced vocabulary, complex grammar, long sentences, and formal phrases. It's understandable. Maybe you've been told that this is what good English looks like. Maybe you've read articles or written essays where this kind of language is expected. But when we carry that mindset into real conversations, it becomes a problem. Speaking to impress often leads to speaking in a way that doesn't feel natural, not to you, and not to the person listening. It creates a distance. You start building sentences that are too long, too stiff, or too abstract. You spend more time thinking about the words than focusing on the message, and the person listening might miss the point entirely. Let me say something clearly. The most powerful English is not the most complicated. It's the clearest. The goal of communication is connection. That's true in English, and in every other language. When someone talks to you, they're not hoping to hear perfect grammar or academic language. They're hoping to understand you. They want to know what you think, how you feel, what you mean. So the more clearly and simply you speak, the stronger the connection becomes. I've worked with learners from many different backgrounds: lawyers, engineers, doctors, students, parents, and no matter what their job or level of education, the same principle applies. If your English is hard to follow, your message gets lost. But when your English is clear, your ideas are heard. So how do you simplify your speech without losing the meaning? Start with the basic structure of your sentences. One of the easiest and most powerful things you can do is focus on using subject-verb-object. For example, I need help. She called me. We finished the report. These are short, direct, and easy to understand. They're the foundation of natural conversation. If you want to add more details, you can. But keep that structure clear. The listener always knows who is doing what. Next, use common expressions that people hear every day. Instead of saying it is imperative that we proceed accordingly, just say we need to move forward. Instead of I would greatly appreciate it if you could provide assistance, say can you help me? These kinds of changes might seem small, but they make a big difference. They make your speech feel more familiar, more human. I also recommend using direct questions instead of indirect or overly polite ones, especially in casual or semi-formal situations. For example, what time do we start? Where is the meeting? Can you explain this again? These are natural. You don't need to say I was wondering if perhaps you might know what time we are supposed to begin. That kind of sentence is not wrong, but it creates unnecessary confusion. When you speak directly, people don't have to guess what you're asking. They just answer. Another tool that helps with clarity is repetition. Many learners avoid repeating themselves because they think it sounds wrong or lazy. But native speakers repeat things all the time. Repetition shows that something is important. It gives your listener more time to process what you're saying. And it can even make your message stronger. Let's say you want to express that you're not happy with the situation. You could say, I'm not okay with this. No, really, I'm not okay with how this was done. That kind of repetition adds emotion. It makes the message more personal. Or you might repeat a key point in a meeting. We need more time. I just want to say that again, we need more time to finish this properly. You're not using advanced vocabulary. You're using rhythm, emphasis, and clarity. And it works. You can also use personal examples to make your message easier to understand. Instead of explaining something in theory, explain it with a story. Talk about your own experience, or something simple you've seen. For instance, if you're trying to explain why a project failed, say, "I'll give you an example. Last year, we rushed the timeline, and we made mistakes. The same thing could happen again." That example gives context. It makes the idea more real. And it shows that your English is not just correct, it's meaningful. A lot of learners ask me, "But won't simple English make me sound less professional?" And my answer is always the same: absolutely not. Simple does not mean unprofessional. Simple means focused. It means efficient. It means your audience gets your message the first time, without having to ask you to explain it again. Think about great speakers, the best TED Talks, the most powerful presentations. They don't use complicated language. They use clear, direct, emotional stories and words that everyone can understand. That's what makes them memorable. So if you ever feel like you need to use big words or long sentences to prove your English level, pause and ask yourself, is this helping the person understand me, or am I just trying to sound impressive? Because in the end, the people you talk to will remember how clearly you spoke, how natural you sounded, and how easy it was to follow your thoughts. They won't remember your vocabulary score. They'll remember how you made them feel. Your job as a speaker is not to impress. Your job is to connect. Your job is to make your message easy to follow. And the best way to do that is to keep your language simple, clear, and human. Let me tell you about someone I worked with named Hugo. He's a graphic designer from Paris, and like many learners of English, he was really passionate about improving his speaking skills. Hugo had been learning English for several years. He was confident in reading and writing, and his listening was strong. But speaking, that's where he felt stuck, not because he didn't know the words. Hugo knew lots of words. He had studied long lists of idioms, phrasal verbs, even expressions that most native speakers rarely use. But when he spoke, something didn't feel right, at least not to him. In our first sessions together, Hugo told me he wanted to sound more native. And when he said that, he meant using phrasal verbs like look forward to, get along with, carry on, and figure out. He had memorized expressions like hit the nail on the head, and a blessing in disguise. He tried to fit them into his sentences because he thought that's what fluent speakers do. But the result was often the opposite of what he wanted. His English sounded a little stiff, sometimes forced, and he didn't feel confident. Let me give you an example. One day, during a group call, someone on his team made a suggestion, and Hugo responded with, "Yes, I reckon that hits the nail on the head. We can carry on with this approach." Technically, there was nothing wrong with the sentence, but the tone felt off. The other people in the meeting were just saying things like "I agree," or "that makes sense." Hugo's sentence stood out, but not in the way he intended. It didn't sound wrong, it just didn't sound natural. And that was exactly the problem. Hugo wasn't trying to communicate. He was trying to perform. We talked about it afterward, and I asked him a simple question. When you speak French, are you trying to sound clever, or are you just trying to connect with people? He smiled. He got the point. So we tried a new approach. We stopped focusing on expressions, and we started focusing on simplicity. I encouraged him to use clear, direct phrases like, "I agree with you. Let's try this way. I think this idea is better. Can we change the color? I'm not sure about this layout." And something interesting happened. Hugo started to sound like himself. His ideas came out faster. He didn't hesitate as much. He stopped trying to remember fancy expressions and just spoke the way people do when they're being honest. In the next few team meetings, he stuck to simple phrases. Nothing complex. Nothing he wouldn't say in French. And for the first time, he told me afterward, people complimented his English. One of his coworkers even said, "Hugo, your English is really clear. I understand you easily." That one sentence meant more to Hugo than any language test score. It gave him a kind of freedom. He realized that speaking well isn't about showing everything you know, it's about being understood without effort. Sarah, one of the managers in his company, and a native English speaker, noticed the shift too. She said, "I used to feel like Hugo was searching for the right words while he was speaking. Now it's like he just talks to us." She pointed out something important. His message was landing. People didn't have to work to follow what he was saying. That made everyone more relaxed, and as a result, Hugo became more confident. Confidence doesn't come from having perfect grammar or using phrasal verbs. It comes from knowing that people understand you and want to hear more. And that's exactly what Hugo experienced. He stopped trying to sound like someone else. He let go of the pressure to impress, and he gave himself permission to be clear, instead of complex. He still uses some phrasal verbs when they come naturally. He still knows expressions, but he doesn't chase them anymore. If they come, great. If not, it's okay. The point is, his English now reflects his ideas, not his textbook. What made the difference for Hugo wasn't a new app or a special lesson. It was a mindset shift. He started thinking, how can I make my message easy for the other person, instead of how can I sound advanced? And with that shift, everything else became easier: his pronunciation, his flow, even his listening, because he was less focused on decoding every word and more focused on the whole meaning of the conversation. I think a lot of learners can relate to Hugo's story. You work so hard to build your vocabulary. You learn idioms, collocations, complicated structures. And that's valuable. But if you don't know when to not use them, you risk losing clarity. Fluency isn't about knowing everything. It's about using what you know in the right way. When Hugo told me about the first time someone praised his English, he said it felt like a turning point. He finally understood that the people around him weren't waiting for perfect English. They just wanted to understand him. That simple truth changed how he approached every conversation. And once that pressure lifted, he found his real voice in English. A voice full of memorized phrases, but one that was natural, calm, and true to who he is. Let me know when you're ready for the next topic. When people ask me how to sound more natural in English, I always come back to one simple idea: listening first. The more you listen to real English, the easier it becomes to speak it naturally. It's not just about hearing words, it's about absorbing the rhythm, the pauses, the intonation, and the way words flow together in real conversations. That's how native speakers learn their language as children. And that's how you can start to truly feel the language instead of just thinking about grammar rules. I want to share a little bit of what I've seen with my student, Sarah. She used to be very focused on grammar, and she had a strong vocabulary. But she often felt like her speech didn't match how she heard English in movies or interviews. She would write great sentences, but when she spoke, she sounded overly formal or flat. There was something missing and she knew it. What changed everything for her was the shift to listening and imitation. Sarah began to treat English listening like a daily workout. She didn't wait for a perfect moment or for a long study session. She made listening a part of her day. Sometimes she listened while cooking, other times during short walks or even while brushing her teeth. But here's the key: she didn't just hear the English. She paid attention to the way people spoke. She noticed how a simple phrase, like "Are you coming?" sounded fast and connected, almost like jaw coming. She noticed that "I don't know" is often said like "I don't know," and how "let me think" had a certain rhythm and tone. The real breakthrough came when she started imitating these phrases out loud. Not just once, but over and over. She would play a short sentence from a podcast or a series, pause, and repeat it exactly as she heard it. She tried to copy the intonation, the speed, even the emotion in the voice. At first it felt strange. I remember her saying, "Sarah, I feel like I'm pretending to be someone else." But after a few days, it started to feel more natural. And after a few weeks, those phrases started coming out automatically in conversation. She didn't memorize them the traditional way. She absorbed them through her ears, through repetition, through feeling the language in her mouth. And what happened was amazing. Her speech became smoother. Her confidence grew. She wasn't translating in her head anymore. Instead of stopping to think, she had phrases ready, because she had heard them so many times in real contexts. Sarah often listened to the same short clips many times. One of her favorites was a scene from a series where a character says, "That's not what I meant." She said that she practiced this sentence at least 50 times, trying to match the tone exactly. And later, in a meeting with her international team, someone misunderstood her, and without thinking, she said, "That's not what I meant." Naturally, smoothly, and she didn't even realize until later that she had used the exact sentence she had practiced. That moment gave her a real sense of progress. What's powerful about this method is that it trains your brain without forcing it. You're not sitting down with a grammar book trying to memorize rules. You're letting your ears and your voice guide you. You're learning the music of English. And that's what makes a speaker sound natural. I often recommend listening to podcasts with casual conversation. Not just news or formal interviews, but episodes where people talk the way they do in real life. Things like, "What have you been up to?" "Oh, just taking it easy." "No way. That's crazy. You gotta be kidding." These are the kinds of expressions that build a bridge between your English and the English people actually use. And when you hear them often enough, you begin to feel where the emphasis goes, how the tone rises and falls, and when to pause. One technique that helped Sarah was shadowing. She'd play a podcast or a scene from a series, and she'd speak along with it at the same time like an echo. Not after the sentence, but right with it. It was difficult at first, because it forced her to speak fast, match the rhythm, and keep up. But it trained her mouth and her ears to work together. It wasn't about understanding every word perfectly. It was about building flow, confidence, and connection with the language. She didn't need to watch hours of content every day. In fact, short, focused sessions were more effective. 10 minutes of repeating real conversations was more valuable than an hour of watching passively. And when she combined listening with imitation, her speaking improved without her even realizing how much. Another thing she started doing was writing down the short phrases she liked. Not full sentences or grammar points, just everyday chunks. Things like "I'll get back to you," or "That sounds good," or "Let's see how it goes." And she would say them to herself while walking, or even looking in the mirror. She treated them like lines in a play, practicing how they sounded, how they felt. Over time, Sarah became more confident, because her brain had heard and repeated these phrases so many times, that they became part of her. She wasn't trying to remember what to say, she was simply responding with language that felt familiar and comfortable. Listening first isn't just about improving your comprehension. It's about changing your relationship with the language. It allows you to learn without pressure. It gives you models to follow. And it builds a foundation where speaking becomes a natural next step, not a separate skill. When I first met Emma, she was already an experienced language teacher in Berlin. She taught German to international students, and had a deep understanding of how people learn languages. But when it came to speaking English, she told me something that stayed with me. "I don't want to erase my accent. I just want to sound clear and natural." That one sentence captured exactly what so many learners feel. They don't want to lose their identity, they just want to be understood, to speak with flow, and to feel confident in every word they say. Emma found a powerful method that completely changed the way she spoke English. She didn't follow long pronunciation drills or memorize word lists. Instead, she focused on just one sentence a day. That was her routine, one sentence. Each morning, she chose a short phrase from a podcast, a video, or a dialogue. Something natural, something real. Sometimes, it was a simple sentence like, "Could you say that again?" Or "Let me think about it." Nothing dramatic. But every sentence had one thing in common: it was spoken by a native speaker in a real context. She would listen to that sentence several times, usually with her headphones, paying attention to the exact way it was said. She didn't just try to repeat the words. She listened for the pauses, the pitch, the emphasis, the flow. She often said it felt like learning music. After a few listens, she recorded herself saying the sentence, just once. Then she listened to both versions, the original and hers. And she didn't rush to judge. She listened with curiosity. She tried to hear what was different. Was her pitch flat? Did she stress the wrong syllable? Did she pause too soon? Then, she would adjust. Sometimes it took her 5 tries, sometimes 10. But she never felt frustrated. She enjoyed it. She called it her daily English tuning. Like tuning an instrument, she was tuning her voice, her ear, her timing, and the results were incredible, not because she started sounding like an American or British speaker, but because her English started to flow. The most beautiful part of her journey was how personal and intentional it was. One sentence a day gave her the freedom to focus deeply. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't racing through lessons. She gave herself permission to go slow and be present. That created space for real improvement. Emma told me that she noticed big changes. After only a couple of weeks, she was in a cafe with 2 friends, one from Australia and one from Canada. She asked, "Do you want to sit outside?" Just a normal question. But her friends looked surprised and said, "Wow, your English is sounding so natural lately." That moment meant everything to her. Not because of the compliment, but because she knew exactly why it had happened. That one sentence she had practiced a week earlier was the same one she used without thinking. The way she selected her sentences was also thoughtful. She picked ones that matched real conversations she might have in her daily life. She avoided textbook lines like "the weather is nice today." Instead, she chose phrases like, "Can I join you?" or "I'll get it done by tomorrow." Phrases that real people use in real settings. She was building a toolkit of useful, familiar expressions that she could access without hesitation. Her recordings became a little diary. After a few months, she had dozens of saved voice memos on her phone. She could scroll back and hear how she used to sound and compare it to how she spoke now. And what stood out the most wasn't just better pronunciation, it was confidence. Her voice had more energy, more variety, more life. She wasn't just saying words, she was communicating with feeling. Emma also noticed that her students, who were learning German, responded differently when she used English in class. They paid more attention. They asked her how she improved her pronunciation. Some of them even started trying her method of one sentence a day. It created a ripple effect. Her effort became an inspiration. What made her practice so effective was the balance between repetition and reflection. She didn't mind repeating the same sentence over and over, because she was actively listening, not passively copying. She wasn't chasing perfection. She was searching for clarity, rhythm, and expression. That mindset allowed her to stay motivated and enjoy the process. Emma's story reminds me that sounding natural doesn't mean removing your accent. It means connecting more clearly. It means training your ear to hear how English lives in real life, and training your mouth to move in sync with those sounds. With time, patience, and just one sentence a day, Emma was able to shift the way her English felt not only to others, but to herself. When I was learning English more deeply, I remember opening textbooks and memorizing phrases like, "How do you do?" and "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." They sounded elegant and formal, and I thought, this must be how native speakers talk. But then I watched a movie, and no one said those things. They said things like, "Hey, what's up?" or "Nice to meet you," or even just "Hey." That's when I realized something important. If you only learn English from textbooks, you're not learning how people actually speak. You're learning how people should speak in a perfect, polished version of the language. But real life isn't like that. Sarah and I have talked about this a lot. She's always reminding learners that real English is full of shortcuts, contractions, idioms, and small expressions that never appear in traditional grammar books. For example, instead of saying, "I cannot attend the meeting," most people say, "I can't make it." Instead of, "Would you like to come with me?" people say, "Wanna come?" These phrases are natural, fast, and full of personality. They reflect how people really interact. One of the biggest shifts in my English happened when I started noticing these everyday expressions. I stopped trying to sound like a textbook and started trying to sound like a person. And that didn't mean giving up grammar, it meant adapting it. It meant understanding that in real conversations, people often drop words, blend sounds, or even change the order of a sentence. Think about greetings. Textbooks might say, "How do you do?" But when was the last time you heard someone say that in a cafe, on the phone, or at a party? It's not wrong. It's just not common anymore. What you'll hear more often is "How's it going?" or "How've you been?" or even just "Yo." These are the phrases that carry the rhythm of modern English. They're informal, expressive, and they help you connect instantly. That's why I always recommend listening to how native speakers talk in real situations, not scripted dialogues from old books, but podcasts, YouTube videos, interviews, and casual conversations. When you pay attention to the actual words people use, you start to build your own bank of expressions. And this becomes your active vocabulary, the set of words and phrases you can use without thinking, because you've heard them so many times in natural settings. Sarah once told me how she started collecting phrases in a notebook. Not fancy words, just real ones. Things like "I'm good, thanks," "You've gotta be kidding," "Sounds great," "No worries, I'll catch you later." She wrote them down as she heard them in shows or interviews. Then she would practice saying them, using the same tone and speed. It made her feel like she was stepping into the real flow of the language, not just learning from the outside. The truth is, native speakers break grammar rules all the time in casual speech. Not because they don't know grammar, but because conversation is fast, emotional, and efficient. We say gonna instead of going to, or lemme instead of let me. We skip subjects sometimes. Instead of, are you coming? Someone might just say coming. And yet, it's all perfectly clear. That's the beauty of spoken English. It bends and shifts to fit the moment. But this doesn't mean grammar isn't important. It absolutely is. Grammar gives you the foundation, the structure, the logic of the language. It helps you write clearly, understand complex ideas, and avoid confusion. But once you understand the rules, you also need to learn how they're used and how they're softened, shortened, or reshaped. In real life, that's where your fluency begins to grow. One of my favorite examples is the difference between do you want to come and do you want to come. They mean the same thing, but one is smoother, faster, and more likely to be used in everyday speech. The key is to recognize both and know when to use each. In a formal email, you might write the full version. In a casual chat, you'll probably say the short one. Learning both gives you flexibility and confidence. When you move beyond the textbook and into real conversations, you also learn how emotion works in English. A phrase like "you've got to be kidding me" can be said with surprise, frustration, or laughter. It depends on your tone. And tone doesn't come from reading. It comes from listening. You begin to feel how the language moves. You notice how people emphasize words, stretch sounds, or add pauses for effect. That's why I encourage you to listen to English in the wild. Choose a show you like and pick out the small expressions people use. Don't try to memorize a list. Just notice the ones that repeat. You'll hear things like "no way," "that's crazy," "I'm in," "I'll pass," "kinda sorta," "I guess so." These aren't in many textbooks, but they're everywhere in conversation. It helps to repeat them out loud. Let your mouth get used to how they feel. If you're learning with subtitles, read them out loud with the actors. If you're watching a video, pause and imitate a phrase exactly as you heard it. That's how you bridge the gap between passive understanding and active speaking. So instead of saying, "It is raining heavily," try, "It's pouring." Instead of, "I do not agree with you," try, "I don't think so." You're still being clear. You're still using correct English. But now you're speaking with rhythm and authenticity. Learning this way makes English feel more alive. It becomes something you live with, not just something you study. And when you use the same expressions native speakers use, even simple ones, you start to feel more confident, more connected, more real. That's the goal: not to sound perfect, but to sound like yourself, speaking English the way people truly speak it. I remember the first time I spoke with Miguel. He was from Lisbon, very polite, articulate, and with an excellent grasp of English grammar. He had studied English for years, and could read technical articles without trouble. But something didn't quite click when it came to real-life conversations. He told me that every time he watched a movie or TV series in English, he felt completely lost. Even with subtitles, the pace, the slang, the contractions, it all felt like a different language. Miguel was confused. How could he know so many words and still feel like he wasn't understanding anything? He described watching a scene in an American sitcom. The characters were chatting fast, joking, overlapping speech. He paused the scene, rewound, listened again. Still, it felt like noise. That's when he decided to do something different. Instead of watching polished, scripted content, he started looking for real conversations. He searched YouTube for vlogs, interviews, podcast snippets, street interviews, even reaction videos, anything where people were speaking naturally. And watched not just to understand the words, but to feel the rhythm, the pauses, the emotion, in real talk. At first he felt overwhelmed. He told me, "They talk so fast, and the words just melt together." But little by little, things began to change. He started to notice phrases that repeated often. Things like "you know what I mean," "I'm not sure about that," "let me think," and "that's crazy." These weren't the kind of expressions he had learned in textbooks. They were casual, almost invisible in writing, but powerful in real communication. Miguel began to write these phrases down and repeat them out loud. He didn't worry about speaking fast. He focused on matching the rhythm, the sound, the feeling behind the words. One day, During a meeting at his job, a colleague from the US said something like, "Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky, but let's give it a shot." That moment hit Miguel differently. He had heard that exact kind of phrase in a vlog he watched the night before. This time he didn't freeze. He nodded and responded smoothly, "Yeah, let's try and see how it goes." It was short, clear, natural. His colleague smiled. There was no awkward pause, no confusion, just fluent communication. That was a turning point for Miguel. He realized that real English doesn't always follow the clean, structured form he had studied. It's flexible, it bends, it's filled with emotion, filler words, pauses, and real-world logic. He started noticing contractions more, like gonna wanna lemme, and he practiced saying them out loud. He didn't just repeat them, he imitated the tone, the casual feeling, and slowly, his ears got better. He could catch whole chunks of sentences without needing to translate. Miguel also did something I always recommend. He shadowed real conversations. He picked a short clip 2 or 3 minutes long, and listened several times. Then he would play a few seconds, pause, repeat what he heard out loud, and compare. He didn't aim for perfection, he aimed for connection. He told me he started enjoying the challenge. Instead of saying, "I don't understand native speakers," he began saying, "I'm learning to hear how they really speak." That mindset made all the difference. One thing that helped Miguel a lot was focusing on high-frequency patterns. For example, instead of memorizing single words, like analyze or approach, he listened for phrases like "I think we should," "What do you mean by that?" or "That makes sense." These were the phrases people actually used in meetings and casual conversations, and once he recognized them, he could use them too. He also learned to let go of the idea that he had to understand every single word. That was hard at first, but he realized that in real life, even native speakers miss words sometimes. The key was to understand the intention, the overall meaning. Context helped, tone helped, and repetition listening to similar types of conversations again and again helped his brain adapt. Miguel now tells his friends who are learning English, "Don't worry about catching every word. Pay attention to how people talk. Notice what they say again and again. That's the English you need." He feels more relaxed now in conversations. He no longer fears meetings in English or chats with native speakers. He knows that fluency is not about knowing every rule, it's about being part of the rhythm of real communication. When he shared his story with me, I could hear the pride in his voice. It wasn't just about speaking better. It was about finally feeling part of the conversation. About no longer standing on the outside, listening in confusion, but stepping inside and responding with confidence. And that journey didn't come from studying harder, it came from listening with a new purpose. From realizing that fluency starts with your ears, and that every phrase you understand is one more tool you can use to speak clearly, naturally, and with real impact. One of the biggest lessons I've learned, and one I always share with my students, is this: everyday practice beats weekly perfection. It's a simple idea, but it can completely change the way you improve your English. Many learners think they need to study hard for hours once or twice a week, then take long breaks. But the truth is, consistent, small daily habits have a much bigger impact than occasional marathon sessions. Imagine your brain like a muscle. If you want it to get stronger, you don't lift heavy weights once a week, and then rest for days. You train a little bit every day. The same goes for learning a language. When you practice speaking, listening, or thinking in English every day, your brain starts to build strong connections. It gets used to the language, and over time, it becomes easier and faster to respond. I often suggest that people start with simple daily habits that fit naturally into their routines. You don't have to block hours on your calendar, or feel pressure to be perfect. Instead, try to use English in small, meaningful ways throughout your day. For example, when you're doing simple tasks like cooking, cleaning, or walking, start thinking in English. Describe what you're doing in your mind, or out loud. Say things like, "I'm chopping vegetables," or "Now I'm washing the dishes." This habit helps train your brain to connect your actions with English words and phrases. It's a gentle, natural way to practice speaking without needing a conversation partner. Another easy way to practice is narrating your day. When you're getting ready in the morning, or going about your routine, try to tell yourself what's happening as if you were explaining it to someone else. For example, "I'm brushing my teeth. After that, I'll get dressed." This daily narration improves your ability to form sentences quickly. It helps your mouth and brain get used to speaking English naturally. You can also practice short, automatic responses to common questions or situations. Think about how you would answer questions like "How are you?" or "What do you do?" or "Where are you from?" Prepare simple answers that feel comfortable, and practice saying them quietly or in your head several times. When you actually meet someone and get those questions, you won't have to stop and think. Your responses will come easily, like second nature. I remember one of my students, Anna from Milan. She told me that she used to wait for big opportunities to practice, like meeting native speakers or attending language classes. But those moments were rare and often stressful. Then, she started a habit of talking to herself in English for 5 minutes every morning. She said things like, "Today, I will focus on my work," or "I'm going to the store." At first, it felt silly, but after a few weeks, she noticed that she was thinking in English more often, and speaking during conversations felt less scary. She felt more confident because she had been training her brain daily. The key is to keep the practice light and enjoyable. If you force yourself to study for hours when you're tired or distracted, it won't help. But if you speak English during simple moments, like waiting in line, walking the dog, or making coffee, you build a habit that sticks. Frequent contact with English also helps your brain start to think directly in the language, instead of translating from your native language. When you think in English, your responses become faster and more natural. This is the secret to fluency, not perfect grammar or perfect vocabulary, but fast, clear thinking. Try this. Next time you're waiting somewhere, or walking, try to describe what you see in English. Say to yourself, "There is a red car," or "The sky is cloudy today." Or imagine you're explaining what you see to a friend. This simple exercise makes your brain work in English and connects words with your daily life. It's also helpful to make small speaking goals. For example, decide to say 5 sentences in English every day, about anything. It could be about your plans, your feelings, or what you just ate. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to practice expressing yourself, even with simple sentences. Remember, language learning is a journey, not a race. Daily, consistent practice builds confidence and skill. And when you speak English every day, even for a few minutes, you send a message to your brain that English is important. Your brain starts to pay more attention. You become more aware of sounds, words, and patterns. Your pronunciation improves naturally, because your mouth gets used to moving in new ways. So don't wait for the perfect time or the perfect lesson. Start small. Talk to yourself. Narrate your day. Practice simple answers. Listen and repeat. Every little bit counts. And over time, these small steps add up to big changes. That's why everyday practice beats weekly perfection. It keeps you connected with English, builds your confidence, and helps you speak more naturally and fluently, without the stress of trying to be perfect in a single long session. Whenever you feel stuck or tired, remember this: consistent effort, even if it's small, is what makes the difference. Your English will grow day by day, and soon enough, speaking English will feel like second nature. I want to tell you about Julia, a marketing student from Milan. When I first met her, she told me something I hear from many learners. "I understand English, but when I try to speak, my mind goes blank." What was really happening was that she was thinking in Italian first, then trying to translate into English. That extra step made everything slower. She would hear a question, think about the answer in Italian, translate the words, and only then start to speak. And by the time she was ready, the moment had passed. She felt nervous, frustrated, and stuck in a loop that made her avoid speaking. Julia had a strong understanding of grammar and vocabulary, but her biggest barrier was real-time communication. Translation was creating a delay. It was like her brain was trying to run a program with too many tabs open. Everything took longer, and she felt mentally tired after every conversation in English. So we worked on something different. Instead of focusing on translating, I encouraged her to practice thinking directly in English, especially in predictable situations. We started with what I call daily anchors. These are simple moments in life that repeat every day, and are easy to prepare for. For Julia, one of the first things we practiced was ordering food. She often went to cafes and small restaurants in Milan, and even though most of the staff spoke Italian, she wanted to feel comfortable using English in similar situations when she traveled. So we created short scripts together. Phrases like, "Can I have a cappuccino, please?" or "I'd like a sandwich with no cheese," became part of her routine. She didn't just memorize them once. She practiced them aloud, quietly to herself, every morning before going out. That repetition made the phrases automatic. After a few weeks, she told me something had changed. Even when she wasn't ordering in English, her brain started offering the English phrase first. She didn't need to stop and think in Italian. Her response time was faster. Her confidence grew. We also worked on classroom language. Julia was attending university classes in Milan, and occasionally, there were international workshops or sessions in English. She used to freeze when she wanted to ask a question. So we built another set of ready-to-use phrases. "Excuse me, can I ask something?" Or "What do you mean by that?" Or "Can you please repeat that?" These were phrases she could prepare, repeat, and internalize. Every day, even if there wasn't a real class, she practiced saying them out loud. She imagined different situations, and spoke as if she were there. This kind of mental rehearsal, combined with speaking practice, made a big difference. It wasn't about learning dozens of new expressions every day. It was about choosing a few key sentences, and repeating them until they became part of her. At first, she felt awkward talking to herself, or practicing alone. But I reminded her that these short, personal exercises are what build fluency. And soon, the results began to show. One afternoon, Julia was at a networking event in Milan, with some international students. She told me that someone asked her, in English, about her studies. Instead of freezing, she smiled and said, "I'm studying marketing at the university here. I'm especially interested in digital campaigns." It came out smoothly, no translating, no panic, just speaking. And later, she realized that the entire conversation had happened in English, without her thinking about Italian at all. The biggest shift for her wasn't just about speaking better. It was about thinking differently. When she trained herself to use English phrases automatically in specific situations, her brain started to make quicker connections. The distance between thought and speech disappeared. She began to experience English as a tool she could actually use, not just a subject she had to study. We expanded the practice to other everyday topics. Describing her day, talking about her weekend, making small talk, all with simple, useful phrases. She created a list of things she often says in Italian, and we translated and practiced them in English, things like "I'm tired today," or "I have a lot of work," or "It's cold outside." She used those phrases again and again, saying them to herself while walking, cooking, or even waiting for the bus. Over time, she noticed that her English voice was becoming more natural. Not just the sound of it, but the way she accessed it. She told me once that the best part wasn't just speaking faster, was feeling less pressure. When you don't have to translate, your mind feels free. You stay in the moment. You react. You listen more. You stop being afraid of making mistakes, because you're not stuck between two languages anymore. You're just communicating. Julia's story is proof that fluency is not about perfection. It's about connection. And it starts when you decide to train your brain to think in English. You don't need fancy words or advanced grammar. You need simple, useful phrases that fit your real life. Then, you repeat them, you live with them. You let them become part of your thinking. And slowly, speaking becomes easier, more natural, and more real. One of the most powerful things you can do to improve your spoken English doesn't require a teacher, a partner, or even a classroom. It only requires your voice, a mirror, or your phone. Today I want to share with you two practices that I've seen work wonders for so many learners: mirror practice and voice recording. These simple tools, when used with consistency and purpose, can change how you speak and how you feel when speaking English. I remember Sarah talking about how she used to avoid speaking out loud because she was afraid of how she sounded. She would prepare what to say in her head, but when it was time to speak, her voice would shake. Or she'd lose the rhythm of her sentence. That's when she discovered mirror practice. At first, it felt strange. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, and just looked at herself while speaking English. No one else was watching, no one to judge. It was just her and her reflection. What happens during mirror practice is powerful. You become aware of your facial expressions, your gestures, and how your mouth moves when forming English sounds. You notice when you hesitate, when your voice drops, and when your confidence slips. Sarah began with simple things, introducing herself, talking about her day, describing what she was wearing. She would speak for 2 or 3 minutes each day, maintaining eye contact with herself, trying to keep her voice steady. It felt awkward at first, but then she started enjoying it. It became a daily moment of connection with herself and her progress. One of the first benefits she noticed was her intonation. She realized that when she spoke softly or without energy, her English sounded flat. But when she raised her voice slightly, used her hands naturally, and smiled, her English felt more alive. The mirror helped her see the connection between body language and spoken language. She could actually feel her confidence growing, just by seeing herself speak with purpose. The other technique Sarah used was voice recording. This tool is underestimated, but it gives you something that your memory can't, a way to hear yourself from the outside. She started by recording her voice once a week, then moved to a few times per week, especially when she was practicing for a presentation or preparing to speak in class. She would use the voice recorder on her phone to say a few sentences about her day, or to tell a short story in English. Then she'd listen to it. At first, she didn't like what she heard. Most people don't. We're not used to hearing our own voice from the outside. She noticed that she was speaking too fast, or mumbling certain words. She heard where she hesitated, where her grammar got shaky, or where her pronunciation was unclear. But instead of getting discouraged, she turned those moments into a learning tool. She began to take notes. I paused too much here. I don't pronounce the end of this word. My tone sounds flat when I ask a question. These small observations became part of her next practice session. She would choose 1 or 2 things to focus on and record herself again. The goal wasn't to sound perfect, it was to become more aware and more intentional. Eventually, she combined both techniques. She would practice in front of the mirror, record that session, and then play it back to evaluate. Watching yourself speak on video, especially when doing a mock presentation or answering imaginary questions, is one of the most honest feedback tools you can use. It shows you what others see and hear. You may notice things you never realized, how often you say how you avoid eye contact, or how your energy drops. At the end of a sentence, Sarah used her phone camera to record herself answering common questions, like "Tell me about yourself," or "Why do you want this job?" or "What did you do last weekend?" She would act as if she were in a real conversation or interview. She'd try to speak clearly, use gestures, and stay calm. Then she'd re-watch the video, not to criticize herself, but to observe and adjust. She learned to treat these recordings as part of the process, not a test. One of the best things about these practices is that they are private. There's no pressure. No one else needs to hear or see the recordings unless you choose to share them. This privacy gives you space to experiment, to make mistakes, and to grow without fear. Over time, you'll notice that your voice becomes steadier, your thoughts more organized, and your delivery more natural. These tools also help you measure your progress. Sarah once listened to a recording she had made 6 months earlier, and she was shocked. Her old voice sounded unsure, rushed, and tense. The new one sounded relaxed, confident, and fluent. That moment made her realize how far she had come. It was all because she had created a habit of speaking out loud regularly, even if no one else was listening. When you speak in front of a mirror, or into a recorder, you build a skill that most learners skip: real-time self-awareness. You become your own coach. You begin to notice the small details: your breathing, your pauses, your pronunciation. And you learn to control them. Not with stress, but with calm and focus. So many learners wait for the perfect conversation partner or a speaking opportunity to appear. But those moments don't happen every day. What does happen every day is you with your mirror, your voice, and your phone. That's enough to train. That's enough to improve. You don't need to wait for permission to start speaking. These tools are already in your hands. When I first started helping learners develop their speaking skills, one thing became very clear very quickly. Many students were choosing the right words, constructing sentences correctly, and even using new vocabulary. But something still sounded off. The listener could understand them, but the conversation didn't feel natural. It wasn't alive. And the reason, very often, was intonation. Sarah was one of the learners who really helped me see this in action. She was a dedicated student, always practicing, always preparing, but when she spoke, her English sounded a little flat. Not incorrect, just mechanical. She wasn't making grammar mistakes, and her vocabulary was solid, but it felt like something was missing. One day, she asked me, "Why do I sound like a robot when I speak English?" And that question led us to the heart of today's topic, intonation. Intonation is the melody of your speech. It's the rise and fall of your voice. It's how you show emotion, intention, and energy not through your words, but through how you say those words. English speakers rely on intonation much more than learners often realize. If you ask a question, express excitement, show doubt, give an opinion, or offer a polite request, intonation tells the listener what you really mean. Without the right tone, your words may be accurate, but they won't feel natural. Sarah began to explore this by recording short, simple phrases, and listening to how native speakers said them. For example, she took the sentence, "Are you coming?" and tried saying it in different ways. With a rising tone at the end, it sounded like a real question, "Are you coming?" But if she used a falling tone, it sounded like she already knew the answer, or didn't really care. "Are you coming?" That tiny change in tone completely changed the mood. She practiced with more examples. Take the phrase, "I didn't know that." Said with a neutral tone, it's just a statement. But said with a surprised tone, rising slightly on didn't and know, it expresses genuine curiosity. "I didn't know that." Or try saying, "That's interesting." With a flat tone, it sounds like you don't care. But with a rising, energetic tone, it shows you're truly engaged. "That's interesting." One of the exercises I gave Sarah was to read simple dialogues from movies or TV shows and try to imitate the tone, not just the words. She started to notice how actors used pitch, rhythm, and stress to sound excited, angry, bored, or polite. She wasn't trying to be dramatic, she was learning to make her English sound human. She realized that native speakers don't always rely on complicated words to sound expressive. It's their intonation that makes the difference. We also talked about polite intonation. This is something many learners struggle with. You can say the words, "Can you help me?" But if you say them with a flat or aggressive tone, it might sound rude. A polite tone usually has a soft rise at the end and a gentle rhythm. Sarah practiced by softening her voice slightly and smiling while speaking. Yes, smiling even if the person can't see you actually affects how your voice sounds. It brings warmth to your tone. She even practiced sounding curious. In English, curiosity often comes with a rising intonation. For example, saying, "Really?" or "Oh, did you?" with a light upward tone at the end makes it sound like you're interested. Sarah started adding this kind of tone to her conversations, especially when listening to others. It made her interactions feel more natural, and people responded more positively. We worked on sounding excited, too. She practiced saying things like, "That's amazing," or "I can't believe it," with upward pitch and increased energy. Without changing a single word, just changing her tone made these phrases come alive. I remember her laughing once, after recording herself saying, "That's amazing," in 3 different tones, flat, curious, and enthusiastic. She said, "I finally get it, it's not about what I say, it's about how I say it." One trick she used was exaggeration. During practice, she would go a little over the top with her tone higher, brighter, more expressive than felt natural. This helped her break out of her flat speech pattern. Then she adjusted the tone to something more comfortable. Over time, her natural tone started to sound more expressive without even trying. Another helpful tip was using contrast. For example, when telling a story, she would lower her tone when describing something serious and raise it when describing something surprising. This contrast made her storytelling more engaging. Even simple stories about her day became more dynamic. She'd say things like, "And then, guess what happened?" with a rising tone that built curiosity. We also practiced tag questions, which are great for intonation. Sentences like, "You're coming, aren't you?" can have either a rising tone if you're not sure, a falling tone if you're confident. Playing with these tones helps Sarah become more flexible in how she communicated emotions. Sometimes we'd practice with just one sentence, over and over. For example, the phrase "I see," depending on the tone, it could mean "I understand," "I'm surprised," or "I'm not convinced." Just 2 words, but tone gives them life. By paying attention to intonation, Sarah didn't just improve how she sounded, she improved how she felt when speaking. She felt more connected to the language. Her conversations became smoother, more engaging, and more fun. She wasn't just translating from her native language anymore. She was thinking and sounding in English. That's the magic of intonation. It doesn't require more vocabulary. It requires awareness, practice, and a willingness to listen, not just to the words, but to the music behind the words. Leo from Amsterdam had an impressive command of English. His grammar was accurate, his vocabulary wide, and he could speak about almost any topic with confidence. But still, something felt off every time he spoke. It wasn't a matter of clarity. People understood him perfectly. The problem was something more subtle. When Leo spoke, his voice lacked variation. There was no rise, no fall, no rhythm. It sounded flat, robotic, and detached. Not because he didn't care, but because he hadn't yet discovered what I like to call the music of English. When he first came to me, Leo was frustrated. He said, "I've done everything right. I've studied for years. I watch the news in English every day. I've passed all my exams, but when I talk, I still don't sound natural." I asked him to read a short paragraph aloud. As I listened, I noticed what he meant. There was no melody in his voice. Every sentence followed the same pattern, with little or no emotion behind the words. That was when we began our journey into the world of intonation. I explained to Leo that English is not just a language of words. It's a language of sounds, emotions, and intention. And those elements are carried not just by what we say, but by how we say it. Native speakers don't speak in a monotone. They change their pitch, speed, and volume, depending on the situation. They raise their voices when they're excited, slow down when they're serious, and stretch certain words when they want to build suspense or emphasize a point. Leo was intrigued. He had never really paid attention to that. For years, he had focused on correctness making. Sure, his sentences were perfect, and avoiding mistakes. Now he realized that sounding natural had more to do with performance than perfection. So, we started with something simple: observation. He began watching interviews and movie scenes, not just for the vocabulary, but for the tone. He paid close attention to how native speakers changed their voices when they told a story, or reacted to something surprising. He listened for the rise at the end of a yes-no question, the fall, when giving a firm answer, the playful ups and downs during jokes, and the softer tones used in polite requests. This shift in focus opened a completely new layer of the language for him. I gave him a few clips of natural conversations, some from podcasts, others from casual YouTube videos. His task was to listen and repeat not just the words, but the rhythm, pitch, and energy. At first it felt strange to him. He said it felt like acting. But that was exactly the point. English is expressive, and expressing yourself means stepping into the emotion behind the message. One scene in particular really stuck with Leo. It was a short clip of a woman telling a story about losing her passport at the airport. Her voice rose in panic, dropped in relief, and then jumped up again in excitement when she found it. Leo practiced that story every day for a week. He mimicked her pauses, her intonation, her shifts in emotion. And one day, something clicked. When he repeated the story, it didn't sound robotic anymore. It sounded real. He started experimenting in his own conversations. Instead of just asking, "Do you like it?" in a flat voice, he added a curious rising tone. "Do you like it?" Instead of saying, "That's great," like a machine, he added excitement. "That's great." Slowly, he began to feel how intonation changes the feeling of the sentence. He didn't need fancy words, he just needed to bring the words to life. One breakthrough came when he began telling personal stories in English. Before, his storytelling was functional, clear, but not engaging. Now, he began adding suspense, enthusiasm, and surprise with his voice. His friends noticed. People reacted differently. Conversations became more dynamic. He wasn't just speaking English anymore. He was connecting with people in English. We worked on little things that make a big difference. For example, using a rising tone to show you're interested. "Really?" Or "Oh, did you?" Or softening your tone to be polite. "Could you help me with this?" Even expressing doubt or hesitation became more natural. "I guess so." Or, "I'm not sure." Each of these phrases has a mood that lives in the tone, not just in the words. Leo also practiced using contrast. For example, he would say, "At first I thought it was boring, but then it got really exciting." He would lower his voice on boring, and raise it on exciting to reflect the change in mood. These small shifts made his stories come alive. We talked a lot about musicality. In Dutch, his native language, the rhythm of speech is different. So, he had to retrain his ears and his voice to adopt the English melody. He did this by shadowing native speakers, listening and repeating immediately after them, imitating not just what they said, but how they said it. Over time, he developed what Sarah, another learner I've worked with, calls the native sound, and it had nothing to do with losing his accent. It had everything to do with sounding expressive, natural, and emotionally connected. I remember one day he said, "I used to think sounding like a native meant pronouncing every word perfectly. Now I realize it's about the music." And he was right. Intonation is the key to making your English feel human. You don't have to speak fast, you don't have to know every word. But if you speak with life in your voice, people will listen, they will engage, and they will respond in a way that makes your learning journey so much more rewarding. Leo's transformation didn't happen overnight. It took curiosity, observation, and a willingness to sound silly at times. But he kept going, and the results were clear. He no longer sounded robotic. His English had rhythm, energy, and personality. He had learned not just to speak the language, but to feel it. And once he started feeling it, others did too. That's when everything changed. I know that many learners feel pressure to sound like a native speaker, to imitate every rhythm and tone perfectly, as if that's the only way to be accepted or understood. But I want to remind you of something powerful that Sarah always tells her students. Your accent is a part of your identity, your journey, your story. You don't have to erase it to be fluent, or to be respected. In fact, trying to get rid of your accent completely can create more stress than progress. What truly matters is not sounding native, but sounding clear and confident. And that's what we focus on, building clarity, building connection, and owning your voice as it is. I've seen this fear of sounding different stop so many people from speaking up. They hesitate, they hold back, afraid they'll be judged, or misunderstood, or sound wrong. But the truth is, the world of English is full of accents. From New York to London, Sydney to Johannesburg, even among native speakers. There are so many variations in pronunciation, rhythm, and expression. And in international settings at work, online, while traveling, people are used to hearing English spoken in many voices. What's most important is whether you can make yourself understood, not whether you sound like someone from California or Manchester. Sarah once told the story of a student named Priya from India. Priya had excellent grammar, a large vocabulary, and spoke English daily in her job. But she often stayed quiet in meetings, especially when native English speakers were present. She thought her Indian accent would make her seem less professional or fluent. One day, Sarah challenged her to shift her focus. Instead of thinking, "Will they judge my accent?" she practiced thinking, "How clearly can I express my idea?" Priya began to speak more in meetings, focusing on slowing down, articulating key words, and using intonation for emphasis. Her confidence grew, and soon her coworkers were complimenting her communication style. They weren't focused on her accent, they were listening to what she had to say. It's so important to understand that perfection is not the goal in real communication. Connection is, and connection doesn't come from flawless pronunciation. It comes from authenticity, from showing your personality through your words, from being present in the conversation. Sarah often reminds learners that native speakers don't all speak the same way either. A Scottish accent is different from a Texan one. A New Zealander sounds different from someone in Toronto. And nobody expects perfection in everyday conversations. What they care about is whether they can connect with you, whether they understand your point, whether you're open, honest, and engaged. Of course, there are things we can do to improve our clarity. And that's where practice comes in, pausing to think about sentence stress, learning to slow down when we speak, using hand gestures to reinforce meaning, or even rephrasing something if the other person didn't catch it the first time. These are real, practical tools to become a better communicator, without needing to erase your identity in the process. Sarah also teaches that embracing your accent means embracing your roots. Your accent tells people where you come from, what languages you speak, what cultures shaped you. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. It can even become a point of connection. Many times, when you speak English with a non-native accent, it invites others to ask questions, to be curious, to share their own language stories. It opens doors, rather than closing them. And there's another benefit. When you stop obsessing over sounding native, you free up mental space to focus on more important parts of communication like listening well, responding naturally, using body language, and staying relaxed. Anxiety about pronunciation can freeze you, but when you shift your mindset to clarity and connection, speaking becomes much more enjoyable. I remember Sarah giving an example that stuck with me. She said, if someone speaks English with a French accent, do you think they sound less intelligent? Or do you just recognize their accent and keep listening? Most of the time, we don't judge others the way we judge ourselves. We're often much harder on ourselves than necessary. So why not offer yourself the same kindness you'd offer someone else? This mindset shift can be a turning point in your learning journey. It takes courage to speak up in another language, and it takes even more courage to do it with your own voice, without trying to hide it. But once you do, once you speak English as yourself, not as a copy of someone else, something powerful happens. People listen, they connect, they remember you. Sarah also talks about how accents can actually be an advantage. In some situations, your accent can help others identify your background quickly, which can lead to shared experiences or stories. It can make your speech stand out in a room full of similar voices. It can add character to your message. And in today's global world, that's something valuable. English is no longer owned by one country or one group. It's a shared language, shaped by millions of speakers across the world, and your voice is part of that diversity. That's why Sarah encourages everyone to take pride in their voice. She says, work on being understood, not on being perfect. Use your voice as it is, but train it to be expressive, intentional, and kind. That's what makes people listen. I've seen this in so many learners once. They let go of the idea that they need to sound perfect. They actually start speaking more. They take more risks. They feel freer. And the more they speak, the better they get. Fluency comes from usage, not from hiding. It grows when you practice, not when you wait for a perfect accent that may never come. So if you're holding back because of your accent, I want to gently invite you to shift your perspective. Your voice matters. Your accent is part of your English, and your English is a bridge to connect with the world. Focus on being clear, not native. Focus on sharing ideas, not imitating others. You have something valuable to say, and the world needs to hear it. If there's one thing I hope you remember from today, it's this. Speaking English like a native doesn't mean speaking fast or using complicated words. It means being clear, being yourself, and focusing on the connection you build with others. Every time I hear someone say, I want to sound like a native, I always ask, which native? Because there are so many varieties of English, from the US to the UK, from Australia to South Africa, and everywhere in between. And even within those countries, the accents, expressions, and rhythm change from one city to the next. So trying to chase some imaginary perfect version of English will only make you feel like you're never enough. But you are enough. And today, right now, you have everything you need to start communicating more confidently. I've seen learners get stuck because they're always comparing themselves to someone else. They hesitate to speak because they're afraid of making mistakes or being judged. But let me tell you something important. People don't connect to perfection. They connect to real people. They connect to warmth, sincerity, and effort. Your voice, your story, your ideas matter. And when you speak English, with honesty and clarity, people listen. They're not looking for grammar tests in conversation. They're looking for meaning, energy, and human connection. Sarah always says something I love. Fluency is not speed. Fluency is flow. That means the way your words move naturally from one to the next. It means being able to express your thoughts without constantly stopping to translate or correct yourself. And the way to get that flow is through daily, simple, real-life practice. Speaking to yourself in the mirror. Listening to short conversations and repeating. Watching real people talk in real situations. It's not about downloading 50 grammar books. It's about making English a living part of your daily world. If you're still translating everything from your first language, that's okay. That's where many people begin. But you don't have to stay there. You can start by using ready-made phrases that fit real situations in your life. Instead of translating how you would say something in your native language, try learning how people actually say it in English. That's how you move from thinking about English to thinking in English. And with time, that shift becomes more and more natural. I've seen it happen again and again. You'll notice the change, not just in how you speak, but in how you feel when you speak. Maybe you've been listening to these episodes for a while, but you still feel shy. Maybe you understand everything I say, but you don't feel confident speaking out loud yet. I want you to know that this is a safe space. The English Talk community is here for you, every step of the way. We're not here to judge you or test you. We're here to help you grow. To make learning fun, human, and something you actually look forward to. That's why we keep it real. That's why we keep it simple. So here's my invitation for you today. Choose just one idea you heard in this episode. Just one. Maybe it was mirror practice, or listening to natural conversations, or using your camera to record a short message. Maybe it was giving yourself permission to stop chasing perfect English and start enjoying the learning process. Pick one thing and do it today. Not next week. Not when you feel more ready. Right now, while it's fresh in your mind. You can say something out loud right after this episode. You can repeat one of the phrases we've practiced before. You can narrate what you're doing, even something simple like I'm making coffee or I'm checking my phone. You can talk to your reflection and practice a smile while you speak. The action doesn't need to be big, it just needs to be real. Because small, consistent actions are what create lasting change. You don't have to sound like anyone else. You don't have to erase your accent. You don't have to memorize every rule. You just need to take the next step. Trust that you're learning more than you realize. Trust that your brain is absorbing the patterns and rhythms of English. Trust that your voice deserves to be heard. The most powerful learners I've met are not the ones who study the most hours. They're the ones who stay curious, who keep going, who try again, even when they feel stuck. They turn everyday moments into opportunities to practice. They laugh at their mistakes and learn from them. They celebrate small wins. And they keep showing up, not to be perfect, but to be present. Let's make that your goal too. Not perfection, just presence. Just practice. Just a little more confidence each day. And the next time you hear yourself speaking English, I want you to smile and say, I'm doing it. I'm really doing it. If this episode helped you, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. That way, you don't miss the next episode. And if you liked today's topic, share it with a friend who's also learning English. You never know how much that little action might help someone else. Remember, your English is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about you. It's about your journey, your voice, and your courage to keep learning. So take a deep breath, smile, and keep it real. Keep it simple. And keep going. You've got this.